Week since Donald Trump won the US presidential election, and he's shaking up the Washington DC swamp with cabinet picks that are sending the woke left into meltdown. Now, I'm concerned that the wave of relief that is sweeping Conservatives here in Australia could breed some complacency and send people back to sleep thinking that the job is now done, now that someone who believes in what is normal is back in the White House. So I wanted to get some analysis from the US, and I can think of no better person than one of the world's most prominent pro-family political activists, Brian Brown, president of the International Organisation for the Family. Brian, welcome, and thanks for giving up your time on a Sunday your time there in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. What was it like for you on election night to see your state turn red along with all the other battleground states?
Well, I've got to tell you, it was a great feeling. I'm here. I'm actually inside Philadelphia, as you said, and Philadelphia is a very blue place. And I was one of the few people with a Trump sign on my home. And looking around, it looked a little overwhelming for us. So if you judge things sometimes by, anecdotal evidence, what's going on around you, you start to worry. But by, 10:30, 11 p.m., it started. If you just looked at what the vote count was coming back as, it looked very good for us. And I realized that there's just a ton of people, even in my own neighborhood, who didn't put signs up, didn't do anything, but when they got in the privacy of the ballot box, they voted for Trump. And that happened across the country. So, that's really what we've seen in the election totals is just a massive wave of voters coming out and supporting Trump that may not have been, as vocal as the other side, but did what they needed to do when they had the chance to vote privately.
Brian, were you surprised that it was such an emphatic win? I mean, he won the popular vote. He won all those battleground states. As I said, he's won the House narrowly and also taken the Senate. All the polls leading up to the election said it was going to be a tight race. They were wrong. Did this surprise you?
Not really. When I had been asked about what I thought the outcome of the election was, it was an odd situation where I would say either I think Trump's going to win in a blowout or Harris is going to barely squeak by. The reason for that is that the questions with the polls, the real question with all of the polling was it going to follow all the polling that occurred prior, which is that Trump's support was understated in all of the polling? Or were the pollsters were telling the truth when they said they'd already compensated for the fact that there were a lot of people that they knew didn't want to tell a pollster when they were called randomly by someone, they didn't want to tell them they were supporting Trump when they likely knew that most of the elites and everyone else was against Trump. So there's a little bit of people hiding what they really think. So the question really was whether they had compensated for that based on prior years or not. And clearly they hadn't. And the polls were off just as they had been off in prior years. And some of them were really massively off. We saw an Iowa poll showing Harris winning significantly, and that Iowa poll was just dead wrong. And in fact, that pollster is now retiring from polling. It was so bad. So that's why I couldn't emphatically say what I thought was a possibility, which was that Trump was going to sweep it. I either thought he would sweep it and have a pretty crushing victory, or Harris would squeak by, possibly with only one electoral vote, because had she been able to take some of the swing states, it was a very likely scenario that she would only win by one. So I'm glad we didn't get into that mess, because that would have been a nightmare as far as litigation, lawsuits, etc.
Yep. So, Brian, now that he has won so convincingly, what's the sense from the pro-family, pro-life community in the US? Is there a sense of relief that there's a reprieve for 4 more years from what would have been a continuation of a very hostile regime towards conservatives? Is there a sense of relief? Is there a worry that people might be complacent?
Well, I think two things are going on. I think people are excited and happy that we're not going to face what would have been one of the most radical presidential candidates that we'd ever seen as president. People don't realize Harris painted herself as a moderate, but in California, she was the one who went after pro-life activists, including David Daleiden, and tried to essentially throw him in jail for exposing the evils of the abortion industry. And in fact, one of my own organizations, National Organization for Marriage, we had been sued to try and produce our donor list, and we just said no, we wouldn't do it. And California actually revoked our charitable solicitation license. Luckily, that case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and we eventually won. So, of course, we're excited. Of course, we are ecstatic. But on the other hand, there has been some negative movement on the life issue because we lost many of the ballot initiatives. Fortunately, this time around, we won 3. We did lose 2 years ago. We ended up losing all 10 states that had pro-life ballot initiatives. Again, we won 3, but we still lost a number of other ballot initiatives, and that's had an impact on how strong Trump has been on life. There's been some folks that have been upset that he's not strong enough. My view is it's up to us now that Roe versus Wade has been overturned. It's up to the pro-life movement to win in the states and to convince President Trump to be stronger on the life issue, and that's in our hands.
What more can he do on the life issue, Brian? Given that Roe versus Wade did send the issue back to the states, is there much more that can be done at a federal level? Certainly during the campaign, he and J.D. Vance tried to sort of say that there's nothing more that they could do at their level of government.
Well, there is actually a lot that can be done. Obviously, we want to see the Mexico City policy, no taxpayer funding for abortion being used around the world. That's a decision that would be made by the president. That can be forced through using executive action. And I would hope and expect that that's done. We don't want our tax dollars supporting abortions around the world. So that's number one. Number two, even though there's been pushback against this, many folks in the pro-life movement still believe that we need that the only way that our Constitution means what it actually means what our founders intended, is that life is protected from conception to natural death, and that we need federal legislation protecting life. There are different views on this. Some views say that that abortion on a federal level should be absolutely banned. That's the more extreme, stalwart case. The other case would be that we move incrementally and get some federal ban on late-term abortions. Obviously, our federal government does have the right to do that. I think that there's a little bit of a misunderstanding. Just because Roe was overturned, that simply stops our federal government from interpreting the Constitution to essentially allow abortion on demand throughout the country. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's essentially what it means. It does not mean that the federal government can't legislate right now to protect life in a number of ways. But I think realistically, the fight, other than some very important things like the Mexico City policy, I think the larger fight is in the states, and that we need to rally together to make sure that we win on these state ballot initiatives.
Yep. Brian, on the issues then of the definition of marriage, the whole transgender issue, all this stuff that's happened since the Obergefell case redefined marriage for your country, Trump's obviously been very clear on the whole transgender thing. He wants to get that ideology the hell out of the schools, to use his phraseology. Do you think that he will make good on that? And what sort of opposition do you expect that he'll get, the sort of pushback he might get as a result of wanting to make good on those promises?
Well, I do have to say that this election has been a crushing defeat for gender ideology in the United States. People don't realize that here in Pennsylvania, especially in the urban centers of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, which are very strongly Democratic, that what the Trump campaign did was something that had never been done before, and that is a lot of money was spent on running ads. One of the ads was called They Them, and it basically was an ad that was such a strong ad talking about how the Democrats are supporting this transgender craziness and they care about they, them, not about you. And that ad was just constantly run, especially in the African American community. And if you look at the numbers, Trump did very well, especially with Latinos, but also with African American men. And a lot of this has to do with how strong he opposed this transgender ideology. So I think it was an important point, and that was a huge part of the spend, the campaign spend, was on talking about the negative consequences of this whole transgender movement. And I think that the sort of victory makes clear that this is a losing issue. And I think you're going to see a lot of movement on this, because I don't think the other side can even say that this is a good issue for them to run on anymore. It was devastatingly taken down in this election.
Yeah, we saw those ads here in Australia. Of course, they were doing the rounds on social media, that they-them messaging, that Kamala Harris is for they-them, but Donald Trump is for you. I thought that was a killer line, and as you say, it really resonated. Do you think that the fact that Trump leaned so heavily into these, culture war issues, which establishment conservative politicians in the US and here in Australia, you have your rhinos, Republicans in name only, we have our equivalents in the so-called Conservative Party here. Do you think it might make some of their political hardheads rethink their aversion to engaging in the culture wars?
Well, I hope it will. Do I think it will? I think it will have some impact, but unfortunately, a lot of the folks who call themselves conservative, both in Australia and in the United States, and especially in Great Britain, are not actually conservatives. They don't understand that protecting the family is a key point and a key aspect of what it means to be a conservative. And if the family goes down, everything follows. And that's what we're seeing. And that's why it's hard for them to reimagine their own position, because they're so committed to the notion that these are sort of icky issues. We don't want to talk about transgenderism or abortion or the redefinition of marriage. These are things that make us, that we're not welcome in the, cocktail set in Sydney or New York or London. And so I think that it's still a hard push, but I do think that when it comes to practical politics and policies, that the policies that America will embrace will be very good for the world, and will show the effectiveness of standing on the right side of history, standing up for the truth of what it means to be a man and a woman. And I think then you'll get some to follow, because ultimately a lot of these folks, only care about winning. And because this was a winning issue, you'll get a few to jump on board. But some will still, I think, push back, because they don't want to be seen. They care so much about how they're viewed by those in the elite class that it scares them to be with the people. It scares them to be with Trump. It scares them to not be with what they see as the in thing. And I do think that this election should make them rethink what is the end thing, because the opposition to gender ideology is only getting stronger, and it's clearly a majority right now in the United States.
Yep. I guess, that I guess has made me just wonder how strong the resistance might be. I think, Trump has really thrown a big rock in the political pond. He's disrupted things massively. The establishment did everything they could to try and stop him getting re-elected. There was lawfare, there was the demonisation of his character, calling him a Hitler, his people were called garbage, etc., etc. And this is the biggest comeback probably since Winston Churchill in the late 1930s, I would say. But I expect that the woke left won't lie down quietly, and there'll be a counterattack. Would that be your expectation as well?
Well, I think it's going to be different depending on region. I think in the United States, there will be some rethinking on the part of the hard left. I'm not talking about the ideologues. I'm talking about those who have some power within the Democratic Party, who were willing to embrace things like defunding the police and using our taxpayer dollars for gender reassignment surgery for prisoners in federal penitentiaries. I mean, that's a real thing. And that's actually what Kamala Harris said she supported, using our taxpayer dollars to have gender reassignment surgeries in our prisons. I mean, that's insane, but that's how far it had gone.
Yep.
There will be, I don't think the left is going to win on these super far left issues in the United States. However, I think in Europe especially, you're going to see, and you're already seeing, an attempt to say that we are the not Trump countries.
Yep.
And the European Union is going to try and differentiate itself strongly from America by taking the opposite position of Trump and pushing it very, very hard, especially on abortion, but also on gender ideology. So I think that you have a complicated situation where the elites are going to be pushing very strongly in Europe especially, to be seen as carrying the flag for freedom and equality in their own words, and the people and many of the member states of the EU are going to be much more sympathetic with the direction Trump's going, and who wins is up in the air. I mean, the elites in Europe have a tremendous amount of power, and they've used that power to sort of attempt to sideline and control people like Viktor Orban, or even Italy's prime minister. And it's a question how far they're going to be able to go and what other states sort of follow in the wake of Trump's victory, whether there will be more states like Italy and Hungary that become more conservative or not. So I think that's a question that's up in the air. In Australia, I'm not as familiar with the situation there. That'll be up to you, but I am absolutely sure that there will be many in Australia that use Trump's victory to again, like the Europeans, say, we don't want to be like that. This is a disaster. And any little misstep that Trump makes, they'll say, see, we told you he's not prepared for leadership. Those on our side are going to continue to cheer, because I'll tell you right now that Trump is unleashed. I mean, I know many of the people within the campaign, and as you can see from the appointments, I was just in Washington, D.C. with people very close to Trump, and he is going to move forward with his agenda, and it's not going to be like last time around. He's not going to listen to the folks who say, well, you have to be very moderate, and you have to leave the civil servants in place, even if they disagree with you and are undermining your agenda. He's going to do everything in his power to push forward. He views this, I mean, this is his 4 years. This is the last time he's going to be in that position. He needs to get things done, and he's going to try and get them done very, very quickly. And so you're going to see some pretty serious moves on Trump's part that really will clear the swamp.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think your analysis about Europe, I think that does apply in large part to Australia. There'll be that element here that won't want to go anywhere near the Trump agenda. So we're going to have to push back hard here. What you've said about him wanting to move forward quickly on his agenda, that's obviously right. We're astonished here just watching from afar how quickly he's moved with his cabinet picks and people like Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. But he hasn't had it all his way, has he? Senator John Thune from South Dakota has been elected Senate Majority Leader. He's not necessarily on board fully with the Trump agenda, is he? So there's going to be some pushback and internal resistance.
Well, I will say this. I think that a little bit too much has been made about that. In the past, Thune had said some things where he was critical, but remember, J.D. Vance did also. Thune, in recent years, Thune has been a stalwart behind Trump. You're not going to find something in the last year where Thune is going after Trump. That's just not the reality. So I think people are overestimating the difference. And again, while I supported Rick Scott, that was going to be a tough sell in the Senate for a number of reasons that I don't really want to get too much into. But the Senate has its own rules, its own codes, its own history, its own traditions, and it tends to follow those. And even if many of the people ideologically agree with the president, they're not going to give up their prerogatives and their powers to determine. There's still going to always be some give and take. And I actually don't, I think Thune ends up being is going to be very good for Trump. I don't think it's going to cause a lot of problems, and it's different in many ways than John Cornyn or the prior example of McConnell. But remember, even McConnell played ball with Trump. I mean, McConnell was viewed as not as strong as Trump might like, but he generally moved forward with Trump's agenda. So, there's always going to be some give and take. We are not apart, regardless of what the left tries to claim. We are not a dictatorship, and Trump is not our dictator. And you're going to see some give and take. But in general, the president clearly has the support of the people to move forward with his agenda, and he's going to do that.
Yeah, this is why we like to get the analysis from people like yourself, Brian, because we get a skewed picture from our media over here. Just two final questions before you go, and you've been very generous with your time. Can Trump drain the swamp and set things up for J.D. Vance in 4 years' time and keep this legacy going? And the second question, just going back to Obergefell, which was the decision of your Supreme Court to redefine marriage, do you think under a Trump presidency there might be ways where that can be revisited? Obviously, it's got to go back to the court. Is there hope that we could win back the definition of marriage in law in America? Some people say that can never happen once it's changed. So two questions, J.D. Vance and Obergefell.
Well, I mean, when we talk about draining the swamp, I think it's very difficult to get sort of a total victory over the administrative elite in Washington, D.C. But even a partial victory is a huge victory because, they run the show. And, let's just use an example of ambassadorships. Under the first Trump presidency, a majority of those ambassadors stayed as ambassadors that were already there under Obama for years. He only was able to change a minority of those. And part of that is just because of how he had to deal with the Senate, because the Senate has to confirm his picks. And you and I know that it's so important the way America interacts with our allies in countries around the world through its ambassadors. I mean, in a state like Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, we had an ambassador that totally opposed the people's view on marriage, life, and on the transgender issues. I mean, they were trying to lead this pride parade when many of the people in the overwhelming majority in Georgia said you shouldn't be doing this, and our ambassador is, taking a side here. And that happened all around the world. So I believe that this time Trump is going to say, look, there may be a tradition here that civil servants occupy 2/3 of the ambassadorships, but that's a tradition. That's not the law. And I'm putting in my people. And that's what I hope happens. That's what needs to happen because these people have been there for too long and they're quite willing to oppose Trump. So I do think things are going to be in a very good position for Vance after this term. As far as Obergefell, I want to be very clear here. All that we have faced with the insanity that has come with the transgender agenda, the fact that we are mutilating children, I mean, what is happening is evil. That this directly follows from the notion that we put into the law that there's no important difference between men and women when it comes to marriage. That's what helped get us to this point. And it happened very quickly. So we do need to right the wrong of Obergefell, and there is a lot of hope on this. People haven't paid any attention to this really, even in the United States, but California had a ballot initiative on the ballot during Trump's election to basically remove Proposition 8, to remove the language that defined marriage as the union of a man and a woman in the state constitution. That language stayed in the state constitution even with the passage of Obergefell, but they wanted to get rid of that language. So the left put a huge amount of money in this, and our side did not put a lot of money in it because it was already the law of the land. Even then, 40% of Californians with no campaign still voted to keep the language there. Roughly the same percentage that voted for Trump in California. So don't tell me this is a losing issue. There's no campaign. It was about 38.5%. But you know what I'm saying, roughly 40%. So there was no campaign. So people, there's still pushback on this. We do need a lawsuit to take this back to the court. We have to be very smart about what that lawsuit is. But we are intent upon doing just that, that eventually we get this Obergefell decision righted. It may not be immediately, but long term, we need this out, this lie that was put in the law that there's no substantive difference between a husband and wife, a mother or a father. This has to be corrected.
Absolutely, Brian. Look, that gives us great hope. Obviously, America's decision influenced where we went here back in 2017 with our marriage plebiscite. So we're hoping that, given it's morning in America again, that some of that sunshine might flow out into places like Australia. Brian, always great to get your analysis. Thanks for being so generous with your time on a Sunday night there in Philadelphia.
Thank you.